Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. We're just going to give everyone a couple minutes to connect to the webinar and then we'll get going. Thanks again for taking time out of your day to join us. Well, hello everyone. Happy Friday. Thank you for joining the InfoVia team and our guests today, Paul Hooper and Paul Rankin, on today's webcast. We're very excited to have you all here. Today's webinar will be focused on 2025 data governance trends, insights from our visionary leaders. Mike, Paul, and Paul, do I have you?
Yes.
Awesome.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. All right. Well, without further ado, just so everyone knows a few logistics, we are going to be recording this webinar and we will be sharing it out. You can look for that email probably Monday in your inbox. We encourage you to share today's webinar with your colleagues and friends if you find it insightful. Um, we also will be taking Q&A, so at any time during the presentation, feel free to drop your question into that Q&A chat and we'll try to get to your questions as well. So I'm really excited to introduce you to today's speakers. First, we've got Paul Hooper with us. He was the Chief Enterprise Information Architect at NI that was recently acquired, now part of Emerson. Paul's a passion for converting data into information, enabling actionable insights, informed decisions that advance the organization's mission. His career spans over 20 years and it began in data semiconductor manufacturing, where he fell in love with the power of data and analytics. Paul, we really appreciate you joining today's webcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Ashley.
We also have Paul Rankin. He's a senior data architect, BI and analytics solutions specialist with a focus on cloud architecture and the data management ecosystem. With over 15 years of experience in designing and delivering data integrations and BI solutions for a large number of national and international organizations. Paul, we know it's late where you're at, so we really appreciate you taking the time to jump on your Friday. Thanks, Paul, for being here.
No problem. How come Paul Hooper got such a much more impressive introduction than me? That's not fair.
Just an Excel monkey.
I'll do better next time. I pulled from your LinkedIn. Last, we've got Michael
Well,
Migalski. He's the founder and principal architect at InfoVia, and he draws from a quarter century of software data and security experience at global leaders in healthcare, manufacturing, insurance, education, and service industries. Mike's got a passion for results-oriented value add-on integrations, and he's certified product management professional, a certified data vault modeler, and a certified data vault 2.0 practitioner. Mike, thanks for being here and leading our conversation today.
Thank you. Thank you.
So
Well,
I'm
it's an honor to be with both Pauls, and usually I'm outnumbered in the mics in the meeting. Today, it's the Pauls have an extra head count over the mics, so I'm excited to be here with two guys with as much in-depth knowledge of the data governance practices that have really put it into practice and made it work at organizations of significant size and impact. So thanks, Paul. Back
and,
to you, Amy.
pleasure.
and to the audience and whoever joined last week when we had technical issues, thank you for hopping back on. Seems there was something with the new Zoom rollout, and now it's back to normal. So thanks for your patience with us and joining again. So I'm going to pass things over to Mike to start the conversation.
All right. Well, let's kind of start with the why of this. There's a lot of regulations coming out, some old, some new, and the landscape is constantly moving. So, how do we stay in compliance with? How do we leverage our governance to stay in compliance with constantly moving target?
Paul Hooper, I'm going to hand that over to you first because
Oh, you
I know
are.
that you're pretty hot on certainly the US compliance side. So,
Well, I mean, actually, I think the thing that's kind of gotten on my radar recently is the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, which is in Europe, which is more in
yeah,
your
yeah,
your area. But I think that I think what I would say about that is there categorize your AI usage into high risk, low risk, and think, are you kind of doing the right thing, right? So start there and start to think about the impact that this has on other people, and if it would be viewed by other people as kind of creepy. Start there, right? But the legal landscape, the laws are complex, right? If you look at that EU AI Act, there's a lot of text there, lots and hundreds of paragraphs, and it can be very easy to get intimidated if you look at that. So you really want to put controls in place that guide people in the right direction, as opposed to expecting them to read all that documentation and figure out what it means and apply it themselves. You want to have your legal team reading that documentation, digesting it, working with your data teams, and figuring out how to put the right guardrails in place, so that way people don't have to worry about all the details. But that
I like
said,
that.
you know, yeah,
I like that point. Let's look at these regulations as an opportunity to do what we should be doing as data stewards or data professionals anyway, which is protecting the privacy, security, compliance of the data that is put in our hands. So we need to be good stewards of that anyway. Let's use our governance programs to make it easy for people to do the right thing.
yeah.
So it's interesting. I was working with a client 2 weeks ago now, maybe. I think the first client I'd worked with that I heard had completely banned AI in the use of their data space.
Hmm.
All right. So, I was a bit like taken back. I was like, I thought everybody's jumping on this AI bandwagon, especially, to help them with, you know, obviously, code development, even governance and policies and search capabilities and everything. But yeah, basically they says our company is not mature enough, and our people are not informed enough, yep, to make decisions with AI, or enable AI to make decisions for them, regard the other way around, you could put it. And this was the first time I saw it 2 weeks ago. So I actually, spoke to some guys in the network and was asking, is anybody else doing this? And I think probably out of the network, maybe I don't know, 20 got back to say yes, they've experienced this as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is, I mean, it's not a high percentage, obviously, in the grand scheme of things, but I would be, safe to say there's probably a good, I don't know, 5% of companies out there that are still not ready to go with this.
And probably missing out on a huge opportunity in the process. So they're taking a high road in terms of really out of fear.
Yeah.
Initially, it was out of the unknown,
Yeah.
but we're 2 years into the AI space now. If a company is taking that road out of fear of a leak, then they probably haven't put up the right safeguards. They probably haven't matured in their governance enough to where they're allowing their staff
Yeah.
to use a tool that could be of,
Yeah.
of huge value, but they're kind of shackling their staff without because they haven't put the right governance.
So, I mean, that's one way to stay more compliant, to know what AI do, anything. But,
Yep.
I think we have to be smarter, as organizations, to essentially leverage, anything that keeps us compliant in an organization, whether it's AI, whether it's, controls, whether it's mitigations, whether, I think we have to be smarter. The traditional tick box compliance exercises, driven by enterprise architecture, is no longer fit for business. Yeah.
And the target's constantly moving. So can you talk about how we as data professionals and data governance professionals help implement those guardrails so that the organization can be safer in what they do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can. Oh, Paul, when you go, sorry.
I was going to say, one of the things that I think is really important is to bring your AI to the data as opposed to trying to bring your data to the AI, right?
Hmm.
Because a lot of times you've got your data secured in an environment and you have that governed and you're wanting to introduce AI, right? But if you take that data outside of that data environment that you have secured and governed, and you pull that out of that and you send it to, say, some sort of compute engine that's running that AI, you may run afoul of regulations and even company standards by doing that. Um, you may be sharing that data with the company that owns that particular AI engine, and they may use your data to train that AI engine. One of the things you can do is keep the data where it's at and bring the AI to your data. That's a much more safe way to handle the AI based compute.
Yeah, absolutely. Only one thing I can say this is that, speaking to a lot of CIOs, CEOs, CDOs, they're absolutely terrified.
Hmm.
Absolutely terrified.
Why are
I
they
mean,
terrified?
well, they're terrified of not being compliant.
Hmm.
They're the ones that are going to hit hard. Whether it's personally, with jail time or whatever, or the company is going to get hit hard, in monetary terms. I'm working with a company just now. The CEO is telling me pretty much every week, Paul, we need, additional compliance measures in place. We need to be absolutely, buckle and belt tight. We cannot let anything happen here. And, that is coming before, essentially insights, to make more profit. Our main focus is compliance before acceleration of insights. They're absolutely terrified. Trust me.
Well,
Yeah.
what if we flip the script and we start using AI to protect ourselves? I think we automatically think of the risk of AI as somebody pasting PII or PHI into a ChatGPT window, right? But what about the opportunities that it opens up to use it within our organization to find places where we are at risk or to implement guardrails itself? You use the term computational governance. Paul, I know you've both used that term, but Paul Rankin, I think you were the first that I've heard use that term. And so is leveraging our data and maybe putting AI in the pipeline, is that a common strategy you're seeing?
Yeah, and 100%. I mean, I think personally, I think AI has a huge role to play in governance. And like I said, we need to get smarter. Governance has always traditionally been more of a tick box exercise. Yep. Do you have this data in there? Tell me, is it classified this, blah, 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 tick, tick, tick. Okay, now you can go away and do your work. And, you know, traditionally, no one is ever continuously checking that. But what we need to do is we need to build in these controls, these checks, these classifications, auto classification checks. We need to build them into the data products, the data warehouse, or the ingestion capabilities, whatever you're building. We want to build in those smarter governance controls, these checks, anomaly checks, and maybe you're not going as far as letting it tell you and making a change to a policy or whatever, but essentially it will give you lots more insight into potential breaches, to potential gaps, to potential risks that you could face. And I think absolutely this is a huge role to play. I mean, you see every governance tool now is providing AI, supported policies or policy checks, if you like. Yeah.
I'll come to you. Paul Hooper, any comments on that?
Yeah, definitely. In my experience, one of the biggest challenges with data governance is that it can be absolutely overwhelming. Just the magnitude of the amount of data that you've got to look through um, can be overwhelming to people who are responsible for classifying things or for tagging things as containing PII or other kind of sensitive data. And if, like you were saying, if we flip the script on that and we say, hey, how can we leverage AI to actually help us in governance? What you can do is you can actually leverage AI to help you automatically detect things like PII, social security numbers, credit card numbers, health information, that sort of thing. And suddenly you can take this immense amount of data that is overwhelming to a human being. That immense amount of data is not overwhelming to a computer, right? And it can process through it really fast. And the new AI capabilities that we have today, especially with LLMs, a lot of that data that we have today is in text, and it's hard to process through at times. And if you can apply the LLM to that text, and like I said, kind of bring the AI to your data, process through that, then you can identify things that need to be classified and governed without a human being having to actually put their eyes on that data. And not only does that reduce the overwhelming aspect of the data governance challenge, but it also allows you to keep that data safe, right? A human being, there are a lot of human beings that we trust, but all human beings are fallible. And given certain information, they might be tempted to do something with that they shouldn't. But with an AI, um, that's going to do what you tell it to do. That's what it's going to do what you program it to do.
I
Um,
love that.
yeah,
I would put
I
out a disclaimer there for everyone. Don't think, you can go out and buy, an auto classification tool off the shelf and it's going to like be absolutely, make your world easier. I mean, there's a lot of false positives still out there.
yeah.
You,
It's
you know,
not
you,
automatic. It's
uh,
augmentation, right?
yes,
It's
exactly.
helping the people be better at doing that. Yeah,
Well, Rankin, you certainly have expertise in that area, buying some off-the-shelf software, trying to use it to govern. I like the idea of putting the guardrails in place, upstream from where the data is being used. I had a client that was reactive in that nature, and this has been a few years ago. So AI in the loop wasn't as common of a discussion, but they actually fired an individual because of a query they ran against the data. And I went to the HR director and the head of data, and I said, "You could be proactive in this approach instead of reactive." They were monitoring the queries that had been run the day before and then reprimanding people for running an inappropriate query. Well, why wouldn't you take a proactive approach? And now I think you're right, Paul Hooper. With AI, I think there is an opportunity to intercept those queries and make a determination of whether they're appropriate or not. Or I would even say put guardrails in so that a query that asks for data doesn't return data that's inappropriate. I'm pretty passionate in that regard. We built a product to help do that. So, any
She did.
comments on that proactive approach? Other ways that you've seen that implemented?
Yeah, I mean, I like that idea. I mean, you can sack someone just for sending a query that you don't like. I don't know. I seem that a bit strange.
Yeah.
Yes, if it's a breach of company policy that, clearly they've signed and said, okay. But like you say, I mean, there's a lot of people that are, oblivious to what they can and cannot do. And I think this goes back to our compliant question. We actually need to help our developers, a lot more than we do in the industry. Essentially what's happening is you bring a developer and you chuck them in a data product team or a data science team or wherever and expect them to just, give you the magic, basically. Give me some magic. It's gonna give me some golden nuggets, if you like. And I think that we absolutely need to protect our developers. We need to train them clearly on the guardrails, the compliance to be good data citizens. Because when I was a developer, back in the day, I didn't care about personal data, and we were in these days, you're like someone else is looking after that. I don't need to worry about that. I've just got my nice report with my 10 top salesmen and their wives and their dogs, basically. You didn't really think about that. But now I think we need to help our developers absolutely think about, you know, that kind of stuff. And sustainability as well, we've never ever thought about that as a developer. I was talking to a developer the other day and said, well, how sustainable do you know your queries are? Oh, well, I don't know. That's the next big thing. And developers are just getting so much boom, 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 boom. We absolutely need to help them out.
Paul Hooper and I met back in the big data craze. We were calculating it the other day, 8 or 9 years ago. And I was speaking at a conference on how we were in the semiconductor space, how our own employees were a risk to doing the wrong thing with data. In fact, when I was at Micron, we had a general manager of a foreign plant sell our secrets to a foreign entity, a government organization who was competing against us. And so we had to put safeguards in place to intercept the data or sit between the user and the data and decide who it was appropriate, whether it was appropriate to see that data or not. And that was at massive volumes. That's in the big data, in the times of big data, and that was becoming a thing. We'd been doing it for years at that point. And Paul and I met at that time, and he really liked the approach we were taking and actually implemented it in the semiconductor space. Can you talk about that at all, Paul Hooper? Your use case in there?
Um, yeah. I think I know what you're talking about. We were both on our companies were both using Teradata at the time, and we were met at the Teradata Partners Conference,
That's
and
right.
we were both implementing row and column level security in our environments, and using roles to automatically um, mask columns that role shouldn't have access to, or filter out rows that role shouldn't have access to. And actually, it's the other way around, right? Mask the columns and filter the rows by default, and then unmask or unfilter those for certain roles that should have the privilege to see them. And that's just basic information security policy 101, right? If you've got data, you want to classify it as either public, internal, or confidential. And confidential is not open to all employees to be able to access, but only like a certain name subset of employees. And how do you do that in your data platform in a way that no matter what application you point to that, or analysis or AI engine, how do you prevent that sensitive data from going out to individuals or applications that shouldn't have it? Well, you filter the confidential information, or mask it, so that way that application simply just doesn't have access to it in the first place.
Well, Paul Rankin, I realized in the semiconductor industry, nothing we did on any given day did lives actually hang in the balance based on our decisions or our lack of governance in the data space in manufacturing. It was really more about increasing the efficiency and protecting our internal um, IP. But you
Yeah.
worked in the pharmacy arena, which kind of overlaps manufacturing with healthcare, where clearly lives do hang in the balance. In your case, speeding up that human diagnosis or the treatment thereof. Can you talk about what you did to accomplish that at Roche?
I mean, you can certainly, talk in general about it. Like, as you know, I don't work for Roche anymore, so I can't speak on their behalf. But absolutely, and it was a big part of how to use data to essentially speed up the clinical trial process. As you know, I mean, it's common knowledge the clinical trial process is around about, an average 10, could be 10 years, right? Let's say that as an average from the kind of the development process, the discovery process, research process through to it actually coming to market. And a lot of times, and not only Roche, but many pharmaceutical companies, fail at the last hurdle. So they essentially spent 8, 9 years of their time, research, development, trials, and then suddenly the evidence is not strong enough to go to market. And that costs, as you know, billions, for pharma companies, and trying to use data in a smarter way and governing the data. We talk a lot about at Roche when I was there about secure data sharing. So essentially, sharing secure data, between patients and healthcare companies, but also patients and doctors, for example, and HCPs. And if we can speed up this process, and get to use the data quicker and more efficiently, we can then clearly try to get to the failure or not, if you like, is more quicker, so that we're not wasting too much time or so much time, and I think that this was a key thing that I saw, not only where I was in Roche, because I was more on the diagnostic side, but certainly on the pharma side, we saw this a lot. And I think that this will only get better as AI plays a more and more prevalent role, certainly on collecting the data and actually, translating, the data between patient and HCP, and then HCP and pharma company. That whole translation period, I think, will absolutely be quicker, because to trust me, I was a little bit shocked when I started. I still saw such a manual process of the doctor writing notes, essentially, then emailing the notes to whoever, and then from there, entering some kind of database, and then, doing the analysis, and it went back and forward and back and forward. And, I was like, even then, there's got to be a smarter way of doing this, so absolutely. It
Paul,
will.
in the semiconductor space, like the way it would work there, we were creating millions of these chips on a daily basis, right? Just very, very high volume manufacturing. And we would leverage statistics in that process quite often. And and it was okay if we came up with a change and we were motivated by a statistic says that 90% of the time this is actually going to be the correct thing to do. 10% of the time you're going to get it wrong. So the 10% of the time it's going to cost you money, but in the 90% of the time it's gonna make you money, right? And so that was an obvious, definitely we're gonna do this, right? Um, and it's okay that we're wrong some of the time because we're right more often than we're wrong, and so overall the financial impact is very positive. But in the healthcare space, like if you're wrong like 10% of the time, like lives hang in the balance, right? Um, it, how does that apply
Mm.
to the use of, well, AI or any other kind of machine learning algorithm in the healthcare space?
I think
Yeah, you
you're
cannot.
asking the question, where does data quality? We've talked a lot about data security, but now we're kind of turning the page to data quality, the quality of our
Yeah.
decisions based on that AI. Go ahead, Paul.
There's two things that come to mind. Yes, quality clearly is important. I mean, if your data is wrong and you're making, decisions on whether a patient needs a particular drug or not, clearly that's, a life or death decision. So absolutely, that is key. Is the translation of that particular diagnosis or whatever, getting that as fast and as accurate as possible. You know, that to me is the same data quality. You're right, as your semiconductor, but of someone making a P&L decision or a budgetary decision, yes, it has a little bit more consequences if you get it wrong, but it's still, the speed and data qualities, to that decision. But to me, and just through my experience, for me, the most important thing is the secure data sharing, right? And Mike, you said quite a good thing once when I spoke to you about, listen, if I, had cancer or whatever, dementia, I don't care who sees my data. I just want someone to try and give me
Give me help,
a cure,
anyone,
yeah, a
right?
cure for
A
it, right?
desperate plea.
And
Yes.
and absolutely, this to me, the unwillingness or inability to share securely, this is what's to me, killing more people than anything, and not just in the healthcare. I worked in the government space in Scotland when I was back there a long time ago, and you had um, a police service, you had an NHS service, and you had a social service, right? Who did not share any data between all three, right? And to me, was absolutely crazy. Yep, and you could if you ensured that this data sharing was flowing between all of these three government services, you would catch a lot more, anomalies of, I don't know, children visiting hospitals, but also their parents getting arrested and all that kind of stuff. And
Yep.
and to me, that is huge. Yeah, the secure data sharing, we must improve on that as an industry.
I think as a society, we take safeguards. I think our litigation system, especially here in the U.S., keeps organizations from being willing to share that data for fear of a breach. A question came in here. I think maybe now's a good time to ask it. The question is for Zero Trust InfoSec, is the safeguard for AI that no policy equal no data? I think clearly, yes. The answer is yes. But in these cases where sharing could save lives, at least speed up the treatment process, where where is governance? What is the next step for governance to be able to solve that problem? Let's take the societal, organizational issues out of the mix because us as technologists can't as much address that. But from a governance perspective, how can we solve that problem, Paul Rankin, that you mentioned of three different organizations kind of under the same umbrella, but being unwilling to
Mhm.
solve data between them? How can we solve that with the technology we have? Maybe including AI or not in the government
Yeah,
space.
and I really don't think it's so much of a groundbreaking technology problem here. I think you said it is more of a social problem that they're either not willing to share information, bound by countrywide regulations or wherever. And I think that is, to me, the problem that's stopping technologists like ourselves, that really making a difference. I mean, we could have done it 20 years ago, and with the Scottish government, we could have, you know, really made sure that we knew that we had correlations between all of these three, government departments, right?
Yeah,
We could have done it then, 20 years ago, and we could do even better now, as you know, with the technology we have. So to me, it's not, yes, clearly technology helps a lot better now, but
I,
uh,
I'll come back to you in a minute, Paul. We got Paul Hooper. We've got a question here about maybe more of a comment. We're touching here on data sharing and the difference between governance for control and the governance for enabling the business. I think
mm,
that's a
mm,
great comment. We
good.
need to think
Yes.
more on the enablement approach. And so the next question
Yeah.
is really appropriate as well. They said access control, information protection, obviously important. Who should be primarily responsible in an organization? Is it the InfoSec team? Is it the data governance team? Is it the chief data officer? I added that myself. And I think I'll take the first stab at this. I think the chief data officer should be pushing to share data widely, and the information security CISO should be pushing to secure data and enact privacy policies. And the two of them should come together to produce a policy that enables sharing widely and protecting fiercely because the technology is there. Go
There you
ahead,
go.
Paul.
There you go. So those are two great questions. So yeah, whoever it was who asked those questions, thank you for asking those questions. I love the question about governance for control versus governance for enabling. I think that, and this is a great lead in to I think what we wanted to talk about on this slide that's right here on the screen. Um, so often people hear the term data governance and they think of roadblocks or hurdles that they have to get past or red tape. right? Things that slow down progress, things that impede us from actually making a difference, delivering value to the business. And I think I think the reason that people feel that way about data governance is because we don't start with the why of data governance.
Mm.
And I really like to start with the why of data governance, and I really like to frame the objectives of data governance as falling under the headings of quality, security, and accessibility. You want to improve the quality of data, you want to improve the security of data, you want to improve the accessibility of data. And the reason why you're improving the accessibility of data is because if you data does not deplete when you use it, right? If I've got $40 in my wallet, I go out to lunch, I don't have $40 anymore, right? But data, if I've got 40 rows of data and I use some of that for making a decision, I still have 40 rows of data, right? It doesn't deplete. And so you want to promote accessibility of data, because if you've already gone through the expense of curating that data, you want it used over and over and over and over again. Like Mike, you said, share it widely, right? Because we've already we've already taken the expense of getting that into place, and so we want to gain as much value of it, maximize the value of it, by sharing that wisely. And so yeah, one of the key objectives of governance is accessibility, making the data easy and even fun to get to and interact with. And then of course security, right? You don't want data breaches. Obviously data breaches are costly, both in terms of the initial financial expense, but also the long-term loss of reputation, potential future loss of revenue. Security, sometimes there are regulations, very important legal, um, uh, Paul Rankin, you said, sometimes we need to focus on staying out of jail, right? Sometimes ROI stands for risk of incarceration, right? And we need to pay attention to that. And then of course data quality, garbage in, garbage out. Any amazing AI thing you can imagine, if you have garbage data going into that AI, you're going to get a garbage result. And so improving data quality, is going to have a positive effect on anything you do with that data. So if you think about governance in those terms, quality, accessibility, security, and improving those things, what you're actually doing is you're enabling the business. You're not a speed bump, you're not a roadblock, you're not a hurdle, you're not red tape. You're actually enabling the business to be more successful with using data.
I think you need to
Well,
kind of strike the balance. So, your kind of needle needs to be at the right place for your business. I mean, I think I said last time, that's a word governance. It originates from a Greek verb, which kind of means, to steer and guide, right? And this is what you're enabling, the business to steer the minefield of, data quality, access control, compliance. But actually, IT have gone completely the opposite in the years. They've gone control with authority, and I think we need to bring this needle back. Yes, you still need some control with authority in some cases, right? But absolutely, we need more enablement. And that comes with, like Mike said, this computational part where actually there's a lot of governance we can do now that we don't actually need to say we're governing.
Yeah.
We build it in to the processes. Yep, and actually, yep, no one knows.
Well, and
that's a
and
great
even
point with regard to the best practices. I think I was at a conference earlier this week, and the term active metadata came up, and I think it's been introduced in the context of the data fabric approach, and I think that in a lot of ways, what they're saying is overlaps a lot with your idea of computational governance, leveraging metadata that is live, that is active, that is kept up to date, leveraging that to make active decisions about things like quality, access control and accessibility within our data platforms. Paul Hooper, I think you were going to add something there too.
Yeah, there's another question in the or a comment from Jabbar in the chat. He says, solve data sharing by providing the incentives, right? Pay me for the data. There's a comment I want to make on that, but then also going back to the question about who should be responsible for this.
Okay.
Um, there are some Doug Laney in his book Infonomics lays out some really fantastic principles for how we should think about data, and one of those is what he calls the ownership principle, and that is simply that the organization as a whole owns the data, right? Controls the data, right? That's if you think about data as an asset, it's the organization as a whole that has ownership of the data. It's not any single individual or even team within the organization that owns the data. So you really can't sell the data internally because you individually don't own it. It belongs to the organization as a whole. And embracing that principle means that you're more likely to share it widely within your organization, right? Like I was talking about before, you want to maximize the value of the data, and so you don't want to put any impediment on that at all, right? Especially because data is non-depleting. You, but that said, I think you're absolutely onto something there that you have to quantify the value that data is bringing your organization. You want to actually IT often very well understands the cost of their data initiatives, the cost of their data platform, right? And I had someone say to me a few months back, he was very frustrated with his IT organization at the time, and he said, Paul, IT understands the cost of everything and the value of nothing. And I loved that line. I think that is so often true, that we don't understand the value that the data is bringing. So I absolutely think we should quantify the value that data is bringing and actually report on that, not just report on what is this costing us, right?
Yeah.
In the IT
Yeah.
organization, which is often just a cost center, not a P&L, not a
Yep.
value, provider, but we need to start actually quantifying that. And the people who understand how to do that the best are these domain oriented teams that are in the business. It's your finance organization. It's your customer service organization. It's your sales and marketing organization. It's your R&D organization. Those organizations are utilizing data to bring value to the company, and they should be talking about the value that they got out of data. And also, so going back to the question of who should be primarily responsible for this, Mike, I agree with you that the CISO, the CDO absolutely needs to be responsible for it broadly, but in each individual domain, um, those people, they have the business expertise that you need to govern specific data sets well, right?
I
They
like that.
understand the confidential, nature of certain data sets. Um,
Yep.
yeah, and so you've got to involve those domain-oriented teams.
Well, I think the framework there is that the IT team, the CDO, CIO, CISO, that team is responsible for enforcing the policies at the right place in the architecture. And then your organizations like your finance and HR and procurement and so on should be responsible for maintaining the policies that define who should see it,
In their
where the
particular
enforcement
domain.
happens
Yeah,
there in the
yeah, for
architecture.
sure. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
That's what we've certainly tried to do with our InfoSecure product is create a UI that's easy to use from those, business stewards out in the organization that are not IT minded. You don't want them in your database managing access control policies in the database. You want them running a user interface. And then you'll drive I've often said there's no way to drive a DBA into early retirement faster than asking them to manage access control policies. So put that in the hands of the business. The the management of the policies and the enforcement of them, keep that centralized.
Well, Paul, you made the comment earlier about, just how we're already doing data governance, right? We don't need to stand up a new data governance organization and start from scratch. We need to recognize that we're actually already doing data governance on a regular basis. And the people who are generally doing that data governance work on an everyday basis are those domain oriented teams, right? They're extracting the data from the data platform. They find quality problems, right? And what do they always ask us? They always say, well, can you give me a download to Excel button? And a lot of times they want that download to Excel button so they can put it into Excel so they can fix the data quality problems in there before they put that information in front of the CFO, which is in anticipation of him going and giving an earnings report, right? To the SEC or to his CEO or anyone else. And so you got to recognize that if you don't do data governance, broadly, and kind of keep track of that broadly, your individual people within the company are going to be doing that work and they are going to be complaining about it as well.
Which drives up the expense and drives down the utilization
Yeah,
and the quality.
that's right.
So you're right. It's we're going in the opposite direction. So we need to put uh, those in place. Frameworks can help us do that. Infovia has a framework for data governance. Paul Rankin, you've used a framework at Roche and with your current clients, and Paul Hooper, same with you. Do you guys want to address that topic of frameworks and how we should be leveraging them to speed up the process of better data governance in an organization?
Yeah, I can. I just was just laughing actually. The inside chuckle to myself when you talk about. We should do another call actually on the role of data stewards and and governance there, and cross domain teams. But in my experience, the 5 years that I've been living and breathing, distributed ownership, domain ownership, data products, data mesh, whatever you call it. I've never ever experienced and worked with a client that has essentially like this data steward role. I don't know, call it data product owner, catalog owner. You know, we all think of, yes, we need a data steward in this domain team, and he will look after all the metadata. He will put all the business rules there. He will manage all the access, etc., etc. This is a dream. This does not happen, right? In my experience, you're lucky out of 10 domains, you get one guy or girl who is really into this, job and really understands it. The rest, actually, it's extra work for them. Yep, usually. They do not care as long as they have their dashboards at the end of the day. They're happy. And this is maybe a bit general, but it's absolutely true, right? If we expect that we're just going to assign a data steward to every domain team and they're going to sort out, and look after the data, I think we're all living in a dream world.
Yeah.
What we need to do is get smarter. And you said active metadata, right? For me, active metadata is data running, at the same time of a pipeline and furnishing, data products or data assets, with the right information that people need to be able to consume it. So your data ops pipeline, the schema may change every time the pipeline changes. That's active metadata that's taking it from the technical, schema definition and publishing it to your catalog, your marketplace, wherever. Same as your data quality checks, same as your policies, that is to me the active metadata that's continuously running, checking, updating, and allowing users to use it, and stewards actually not to do too much rather other than make sure the access the right people are getting the right data.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say there's just such often we forget about the value of communicating effectively within our own organizations. And I think actually having a written framework and defining specific terms actually helps us communicate more effectively, right? Like just simply, having a framework and having it written down and saying this is a data steward and this is what that means, and these are the activities that role performs, having that written down, often people will see those things written down and they'll recognize what they're already doing in that list of roles, and they'll say, and they kind of self-identify as that particular person in the organization. I remember I was having this was years ago, but I was having a conversation with a guy, and a lot of times us data people, we use terminology that other people don't understand, just not automatically, right? We use words and things that other people don't understand. And so I'm talking about data stewards and how important data stewards are in the organization, and how this particular group of people. And I was talking to the leader of this particular group of people, and I said it's really important that we identify. We have a data steward in your organization who is doing these sort of things, and and um, and he thought I was saying Stewart. Like we
Well,
actually needed to hire someone named Stewart
Come on.
to to do these things. Like he was
if
thinking,
it
oh, I
only
need
was
to
that
hire a guy,
easy, if it
a
was
data
only that
steward.
easy to find the right
I was like,
person.
no, no, not Stewart. We don't know. There's no one. We're not hiring anyone. We're saying, hey, who in your organization would be best equipped to actually perform these duties as
Yeah.
a steward? And I actually had to define the word steward for him because he hadn't heard that word before. He wasn't familiar with it. And so I let him know kind of what a steward was. That kind of goes along with the ownership principle, right? That the company owns the data as a whole, right? They're not owners of the data, but they are stewards of the organization's data. They have specific responsibilities in terms of it.
Hmm.
Paul,
I
you
like this.
mentioned
Yeah.
last year in the Data Vault at the Data Vault conference when you spoke, and I think people generally felt like WWDVC, you were the star of the show for that week.
Yeah,
You
the,
talked about domain-oriented data governance. Can you touch on that a little bit?
I mean, yeah, sure. It was kind of what I was saying a little bit earlier, how domain-oriented teams, they have the business expertise necessary to govern specific subsets of data, right? They understand the business definitions, the terminology, they understand often the laws and the regulations and their specific space. Just I mean, like take the finance team for instance. There's all kinds of regulations in regards to finance, and a lot of times we'll say things like, "Well, this particular data set is confidential," and some of that very highly confidential data at an organization is often usually the financial statements that are being prepared that haven't been reported to the street yet. That stuff is highly confidential, insider only type information, and obviously you want to secure that to a very specific limited subset of employees. But at the same time, as soon as those financial statements go out and get published down on the street, they go from being confidential to being public,
Yep,
right? So it's not that the table itself is confidential. It's specific rows in the table
sure.
that are confidential, and those specific rows are confidential only for a specific period of time. And at a particular point in time, they actually change their classification to public, right? So that kind of classification, that kind of understanding, typically only comes from people who have domain expertise, like in
Good.
the financial area, right?
Well,
Because they understand their business processes. So
like
it
we
is
talked
so
about.
important to have a domain-oriented team responsible for creating business glossary definitions, classifying data as either internal or confidential, and providing the domain expertise.
Well, we've talked a lot about that security part. We touched a little bit on the data quality part aspect of governance. Let's finish up here by addressing Carl's question about the education of the workforce and really that accessibility to data that data governance should be. It should be a carrot, not a stick. It should be something that's adding value in the organization. Paul Rankin, do you want to take that one?
yeah, I mean, you're talking about democratizing your data, really, safely, securely, quickly, in a governed way. And we go back to to our previous one and question, and we need to be smarter for this. We cannot, continue to push the traditional role-based access control model, for data that requires an approval process, and then there are another approval process, and eventually, they need to get access to the technology to see it, and how do they see it, through which kind of medium do they consume it? 2 weeks later, they eventually get access to the data, and this still happens pretty regularly in most companies actually that I work with. We absolutely need to get that data into the hands, of our decision makers as quickly as possible, and we need, that skill level, that information, if you like, both on the let's say it's a data platform team or a vertical team, like Paul said, a domain team. They need to understand, that whole process. The data platform team, in IT needs to understand that whole process of getting that data as quickly, securely, to the right people. And I think there's a lot of work that we need to do here. And to me, it really can, the whole AI scene, and the automated, like you say, classification, policy checking, automated daily quality rules, everything, in the keyword again, computational. We need to build that computational capability in at the beginning of the design. That's really the key here. It's not an afterthought anymore.
Yep.
Love that question, Carl. So what role does data governance play in the education of the workforce? A huge role, because the data stewards, the people who are governing the data, often they're defining, they're creating business glossary definitions and publishing those out. They're linking those definitions to specific columns and metadata about their data environment. And what that does, especially when people can not only see the definition of something, but they can actually see example data of that definition, um, that educates your workforce tremendously, and 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 um,
Mm.
and it gives an under. And if you've created your data models in a way that really match what your business processes are, what your business is doing, then you've actually, by educating your workforce about the data, you've educated your workforce about your business, because those two things match up. So
Actually,
great question there.
just on that, it reminds me. I was in speaking to Swiss Post. I'm sure they won't mind me saying, last month, and they gave me a fact that 40% of their workforce will be retiring. Their IT workforce will be retiring in less than 15 years. Right, 40% is a huge number. And just as a reminder, if you don't capture that information that they have, you know, I mean, that's a huge amount of information gone. So it just reminded me. Good point.
Yep.
Yeah, totally.
Well, a little plug as we wrap up, Paul. I loved your point about the importance of a a business-driven data model. And I think we talk a lot. There's another concept that we talk about in our industry are data products, or data as a product, and the idea that we can wrap governance around our data objects, model them so that the business understands what they're asking for, put them in a marketplace so that they can know what's there, and they're well defined, and know how to use them, how they interplay with each other,
Right.
and then automate them using the metadata so that access control and best practices are communicated. And in the end, you have a much easier set of data products to consume, which, like you said, drives up the value and drives down the relative cost over time. So that's a framework that we've used at Infovia. We're happy to share with any of you, and I'd love to have you come to us. The Pauls are available as well to help consult on those types of discussions and decisions within your organization. We thank you for attending today. Thank you, Paul Rankin, for staying up late there in Switzerland and joining us from
No
there
problem.
live, and Paul Hooper from here in the US. And we look forward to more conversations like this in future InfoVia webinars. Thank you, Ashley. Back to you.
Yep, thank you everyone for joining us. We'll be sending you a copy of the recording. Please do stay tuned. We've got some other webinars coming up in March. We've got a couple, one around AI and healthcare records, and towards the end of March, one with Wearscape. So we hope that you will tune in and join us again. Thank you for also the contributions of the attendees and the good questions and comments. Have a great weekend, everyone.